Obviously, measurement's a key thing. Attribution, thinking about how do we measure consumers today and what measurement actually matters. So, I mean, the first question from your perspectives, and because it's two different perspectives, when you're speaking to marketers and you're talking to them about measurement, what do you think are kind of the key drivers of what metrics they're evaluating? So what do you think is their number one goal?
Yeah, so at Moat, we sort of set out with a vision of trying to understand specifically brand marketers and really trying to understand how they define success in the context of digital. And it wasn't very long ago when I think most brand marketers, the default that they would look at on every campaign were really clicks and impressions. And Moat really was sort of focused around sort of changing the dynamic around that to thinking about some of these upper funnel metrics, things like, was the ad actually there? Was it viewed by a human? And understanding how much time the user had in front of the ad. And so we've been very marketer driven in sort of shaping our point of view, but also looking at this from an agnostic perspective where we don't buy, sell, or serve media, and using it as a means of getting marketers to invest more into the digital world. And I think Oracle through Oracle Data Cloud has also sort of taken a similar lens and sort of looking at things like offline purchase behavior and understanding how brands can use that to do studies around incrementality and using it for everything around targeting and measurement as well.
Yeah, and then from a place perspective, it's really 6 years ago, it was more about, hey, can you actually say someone saw an ad, went into the store? And especially when you think about mobile, click-through rates are a horrible metric. Like, you don't want to be judged against click-through rate. You want to be judged on what was the impact of the ad, the experience, and did they then ultimately do something in the physical world? And so it was about connecting the dots there. We've seen a shift in like the last 2 to 3 years where it's about incrementality. So they don't care that you actually, they care, but they don't care as much about, you served them an ad, then they went into McDonald's 2 days later. A lot of people do that. So they want to know, was that incremental? Had they not seen the ad, are they now more likely to actually go into the store? So we're seeing a lot of marketers actually optimize towards that.
And I mean, for each marketer, I mean, marketers have different goals, obviously, from their business practices. I mean, are they determining what the metrics are? I mean, to your point, you were just saying, like, they want to see incrementality. Are they determining on your side specifically engagement and what engagement is? Is it based on time spent? So how do they are you giving them the ability to determine that, or are you giving them kind of best practices?
Yeah, so from the Moat side, I think we've endeavored to never really be prescriptive about here's one metric or another metric that you guys should be using as a metric of success. We look at it as a suite of signals, and so again, like understanding basic sort of hygiene things like was the ad there, we think is really important. Also sort of like backing out into where the industry was when we started the company in 2010, really like 80% of digital advertising was direct response. And our goal was basically looking at the offline world of TV, print, outdoor. The big spenders were all obviously brands, but it's very difficult for P&G or Coca-Cola or Ford to basically understand, did a consumer actually engage with our brand? Did they buy our product as a result of clicking that ad? And we think that there's like a huge amount of sort of misinformation and sort of missing out on that whole suite of signals that looks at the upper funnel and beyond. I think similarly in the offline world, when we're thinking about location, for example, 93% of retail spend is still done in the offline world. Even though our lives are digital, we're in front of our computers and phones and whatnot all day. The way that people still buy things is still walking into stores. And I think that's obviously changing a little bit here and there, but it's still largely predominantly offline. And so when I think about the legacy of Oracle, especially Oracle Data Cloud, companies like Datalogix and BlueKai and Crosswise, looking at especially the legacy of Datalogix, where they started off as an offline data company. They were effectively in the business of getting data that allowed marketers to better target direct mail messages and catalogs and things like that. And so they have this rich data history around looking at offline shopper behavior and consumer loyalty cards, and looking at purchase behavior and being able to sort of tie that back into the online world. And so,
Can I just ask you a quick question on
Yeah.
that? So just from, when you think about the offline world and the data quality, just to jump in,
yeah.
the quality of the data, let's say from LexisNexis, is 99% accurate because they have so much information on you through all of the different registration and all of the different aspects. I mean, do you think we're ever going to get there in digital? I mean, and if so, like how would that happen? Where do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of us are here sort of as this convergence is happening, right? Like everything is becoming digital, and the fact that we're carrying devices in our pockets that are mapping the offline world in real time for marketers is pretty interesting. So, I think that this convergence is certainly happening, and all these data sets are kind of coming together today.
Yeah. No, I agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
I would say from the metrics perspective, it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of people just want one or two metrics to optimize against. They don't want that. We have a report that's anywhere from 20 to 30 pages long that have different features like what demographics perform the best, what time of day, what day of week, what operating system. 20% of the people really care about it, and they're actually going in and optimizing against that data set. They're talking with their partners to say, hey, can we have you up on iOS because I'm seeing that they're 30% more likely to respond to the ad and go to the store. But the other 80%, they're just like, hey, is this working or not? If it's not working, I'm going to optimize the way that I normally do is to move around placements or just move around budgets to different publishers.
Yeah, and if they have multiple data streams coming in, I mean, talk to me a little bit about data quality. I mean, I feel like that in the offline world, data quality is incredible. In the online world, what's your opinion? How's our data quality? When you see targeting campaigns, obviously you're measuring them, so is it the 80-20?
Yeah, I'd say it's worse than 80-20. So I can tell you, so we just had a white paper that we pushed out earlier today. We found that 99% of locations that come up through the ad exchanges are not good enough to identify a store visit. So 99% of those lat logs, you cannot figure out if they're actually at a store or not. The average difference between a lat log where we know that person actually was, and the way that we know is we have a panel. We have 150 million devices, but we have a panel that's our ground truth set where it's 3 million people, where they've actually installed an app where we persistently measure where they go in the physical world. So for me, I can see all the places where I go, I've got SDK level data. But then if a bid request comes in, I can actually see, oh, at that same exact time, that publisher, that exchange said I was 16 miles that way. Okay, they're probably doing IP address matching, or they're doing the last location that I had on an old app, or some other thing. So we're actually seeing it's off by about 4 city blocks on average.
Are you sharing that data back to the marketers to do data quality and
We're doing it with
report back
partners.
the different
So
partners?
with the partners right now, I think the marketers are going to ask for it, just like with Moat. I think initially, like people are like, hey, I don't need this. It doesn't matter. My stuff's great. Don't worry about it. Then people start to look at it and they say, oh, this is actually pretty off. Why didn't this campaign perform? Oh, they weren't targeting the right place. And so I think you're going to see marketers start to push for more of this measurability and accountability when it comes to location data, just like they've done for viewability.
And are marketers still overall, just because I haven't been on that side for a while, I mean, are they overall buying all of the different partners in boxes, or are they aggregating all of the data together, deduping, and considering an individual and not hitting them multiple times?
I would say from a location perspective, as well as even from a media perspective, they're narrowing down to 1 or 2 partners for each kind of category, where it's location, where it's search, where it's behavioral targeting. They're not going after like 12 partners like they used to and say, I'm going to narrow it down. They have 1 or 2, they have an incumbent, and they maybe test somebody else.
And how do they check the quality of those partners? Is it from the panels? Is it from leveraging the engagement?
Yeah, I think you can talk about the mode and the viewability and the engagement. On our side, it's really, you got 2 partners, you got publisher A, publisher B. They're doing some type of location-based targeting. We're measuring it. We don't have skin in the game to say we want this to perform better than this one. And so we go in and we give them the report. And we say, hey, this one had incremental lift and $4 cost per visit. This one had no lift, didn't work out very well. They're going to make a decision to say, hey, this one performed better from an independent audit perspective. I think longer term, they're going to dive in and say, like, hey, why didn't this work? What's going on here? Why did I spend $200,000 and not get any incremental customers?
Yeah, and I think the way that we think about incrementality probably falls into a couple of buckets, but one is looking at some of these upper funnel metrics and looking at our raw log data and then being able to sort of match that back to location panel like place, for example, and showing incrementality that way. And then the second way is probably using some of ODC's assets from the data logic side, for example, and understanding things like, if a CPG brand is buying a campaign on Facebook, for example, and spending a couple $100,000 or something, being able to tie that back to in-store shopper cards and whatnot, and basically understanding incrementality from, are they buying more of that product?
Yeah, if you think about it from Oracle's perspective, obviously they're not touching media, right? And there's a big benefit to that because they can provide all of that intelligence and close the loop with the attribution. I felt like with attribution, the biggest challenge is that all of the big guys in the digital side have really been acquired, from Convertro to Adometry, not specifically in the mobile side. So I was excited to hear when, obviously, as we knew, Oracle to purchase you guys. David, I'm curious to see how Snap is going to play this, because grading your own homework, how is, where do you see the future with Snap leveraging you? Are you going to stay independent? How's this coming together?
So our what got me excited about the acquisition was specifically that we would remain independent. And I think I could say that and you're like, hey, sure, that's really going to happen, whatever. I think the great example is Bitmoji. They bought Bitmoji almost 3 years ago. It's a standalone company. It is a top 10 app installed across many major countries now, and they've went in and said, we are leaving this as a standalone because we want this product to grow. We want to have a secondary function. Almost think of it like Facebook with WhatsApp, or Google with Waze, where they've let those businesses grow independently. And even DoubleClick in the early days with Google, the first 5-10 years, they didn't commingle anything, and it's still called DoubleClick. People still call it DCM. They don't call it GCM.
Not until we sold them AdMeld and Invite. Just notice that. But to the perspective, it's great that you're independent, but you need to validate the traffic that's going in. Part of the reason, from my understanding, is Snap acquiring you is to have third-party validation, right? That they're driving in-store traffic.
Yeah. So I think.
How can they do that at the same time when they own it?
Well, they're completely separate. So what's happening is they're actually giving us data for ad exposures, just like any other partner.
Okay, so then they become a bigger panel.
Exactly, and we're not commingling data either. So that's the other differentiator. So we actually are on AWS. Snap actually has a big $1 billion deal with Google, where it's a different infrastructure that works through. Exactly. We have our engineering team is actually 2 separate groups. So our team doesn't report in their team. We spend in excess of 6 figures plus on different offices because we are not going to co-share offices. So we actually have a separate physical office in LA, even though there's a Venice office, because we want to keep things separate. In Seattle, they just took over a space that has 30,000 square feet. We're not moving into that space. We're actually growing out our own space. So for us, it's really going as far as we can to say we are different. The only person that actually talks to anybody at Snap on a regular cadence is me, and I report to Imran. So they're really more like a big VC at the end of the day for us.
And so when you think about measurement, I know you guys are limited on what you can share, you're dealing with 2 public companies, but where do you see the future of measurement as an industry as it relates to to location, proximity? I'd be just curious to hear.
Yeah, I think that, again, speaking at a high level, I think that for a marketer, it's always been about sort of reaching the right consumer, the right context, at the right place at the right time. And so I don't think that's going to change. I think that the technologies that enable people to do that are only going to be accelerated with the technologies that we have: better battery life, better GPS, better data processing, and through the partnerships of the folks in this room, I think are probably leading that charge. And so I'll kind of leave it at that, being in a quiet period right now.
Yeah, I think from a measurement perspective and where it's going, and specifically around kind of location, it's going to be interesting because I think probably half of this room is probably freaked out with iOS 11, specifically around the location measurement and the blue bar that's coming up. They actually backed away from that, but you can expect, I have a very strong hunch that in iOS 12, they will put it back in there. So they're giving developers kind of a warning shot to say, this is coming down the pipeline. So getting location data is going to get harder, and the people who are able to get it at scale are going to be more and more valuable. So I think that's a key differentiator for everybody here. The other is Android O. So people don't talk about Android O. And that is a big deal too, because they're actually limiting the amount of location that can come in. So again, you need to have a kind of more direct relationship with the consumer to get the more granular data sets that come through. And I think you're going to see a push over the next 2 to 3 years around, you just can't go in and just listen for everything and pull it in. That's going to stop soon. And I think that's where people are going to judge.
And that's the product roadmap for Snap, right? And really just thinking about where the future of the industry is going, not where it is today.
Exactly.
You know, from a LUMA perspective, because obviously we see so many of the companies in the space, we see more of a consumer-centric approach, you know, where it's much more about the individual consumers having control, being able to leverage that for people-based marketing, being able to utilize data and then connect the dots. And obviously, mobile data is hands down one of the greatest signals that are out there today to be able to do people-based marketing. To think about how AI will come into play in the future of connecting, you know, upper funnel to lower funnel, connecting the dots. So we see that as kind of one of the signals, you know, people, places, and things are all being digitized in our space. So what is going to be the connected dot? It's going to be the data that you have on individuals and being able to measure the time and the attentiveness to be able to close the loop and show sales. Right at the end of the day, you can see a big backlash that's happening with marketers pulling dollars from digital because of quality controls. One thing we didn't talk about, which I'm surprised, is really thinking about consumer. I've sat at many tables where people have asked me what I do for a living, and I'm like, wow, you know how you guys see ads when you're walking. So consumers are really feeling the pressure today. I don't know if you guys are seeing that and having conversations, but they know that they're being tracked, they just don't know why and how. And they think it's more from voice. I mean, how are you guys managing any kind of consumers' concerns in the US compared to Europe? And I would love to hear any perspective you have.
Yeah, so for Moat, all of our measurement on the Moat product side specifically doesn't really, we don't drop cookies. We're not, it's all sort of high level, sort of aggregated anonymous data. On the Oracle side, on the ODC side, you know, I think they've got, again, a rich legacy of sort of having very transparent opt-out, very strict sort of partner policy in terms of bringing it on and onboarding new partners on the data side. And so I think that, you know, and Oracle has no shortage of lawyers that review everything. So I think that there's, kind of just this, a lot of internal sort of compliance, but then also on the product side, I think it's part of the design process, really thinking about consumer data and consumer privacy. And I think, you've seen the FTC sort of crack down on certain ad networks that have been in violation of COPPA and things like that. So I think that the industry, it's certainly a moving target for the industry, especially with GDPR and things like that happening in Europe. And so I think that this is only going to continue to evolve, but I think we're taking a lot of the right steps to sort of make sure that we're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and on our side, it's really, if you ever want to see one of our apps and see what the opt-in process looks like, we've got an app called Frequent Flyer. We give you airline miles if you let us measure where you go in the physical world. You'll see exactly what happens. I think we ask you 3 different times for your location data. So from a perspective of, hey, is this weird? How are you getting it? Like, it's very transparent. A user has to install the app, they have to opt in twice, and then we get their location data, and they can turn it off at any point in time, and they get something in return. And so we've got an app called Frequent Flyer, Give to Charity. But you can say, like, hey, those apps are a certain niche, that's an audience. We actually have another 150 plus third-party apps that actually have our SDK that go through that same process. So for us, it's about being transparent, because you don't want to be in that article that someone finds your SDK or finds your app and says, hey, you didn't ask me to opt in here, and this is not okay.
And so just a minute ago, we were talking about iOS and what's happening. Can you explain what was it called?
The blue bar.
Can you explain that quickly? Because does anybody know what that is? Yay, nay?
I think most people do.
Just curious, all right.
Yeah, so high level, for the people who don't know, iOS 11 is coming out later this month. iOS 11's been in beta, and during that beta, they actually had this alert that started to come up if location was requested in background. So this blue bar was persistent. So if your home screen was locked, but you had it on, you'd see this blue bar and it have that app's name on there. So you saw a ton of different apps in there, like even mainstream apps like TripAdvisor ask for location data on a regular cadence. They're not doing anything crazy with it, but they're asking for it. But it keeps coming up, and what would have happened is you would have seen an uninstall rate that would have dropped like a rock for all these applications, where people would have stepped away from location and say, how valuable is it if I'm going to lose 12% of my audience because I just spent $5 for each install? So I think that's where it came up, and Apple made a decision in the last release to actually say, hey, we're not going to force this, it's optional. You can turn it on or not, but I think this is Apple just kind of giving a hint to the world saying, hey, this is coming down the pipe. And Android's doing the same thing. So it's not something where the Apple's doing it alone. Android is actually coming along as well.
Yeah, and as an industry, I think measurement has been probably the main focus. A lot of news around it, a lot of big challenges, P&G, at LUMA we just released a white paper on evolution of measurement and just tracking it. When we look at it from a whole as an industry-wide issue, a lot of the pressure has been put on Facebook and Google. It seems like they're getting the most backlash with what's happening with YouTube. Any predictions of where you see opportunity, where you see transformation? Any last thoughts that you want to share?
Yeah, go ahead.
You hit on this before. I think one of the things is it's out of our control in this room is battery life. So if you can actually turn on the phone and you can pull sensor data, GPS, Wi-Fi, accelerometer, gyroscope, all nonstop, and you didn't care about battery, you can figure out whatever someone's doing. You don't need big data models. Like, you can actually see that data set. The issue is that the battery goes down to zero. Like, if you've ever had Waze that's not charged, that battery you can actually start to drop as you're driving down the street. So I think that's more of a macro. As battery life does increase, the opportunity to collect more data to be more accurate comes through.
It's funny because my daughter loves Snap. Loves. And she hasn't been using it as much. I'm like, all right, what's going on here? Like, I'm not getting anything anymore. Because I'd see all the updates and my friends would tell me, like, oh, she's posting. And I'm like, why aren't you using it? She's like, it drains my battery. And I was like, really? Like, you're aware of that at 10 years old, thinking about it, because her and my son have this competition. They always have to have it over 60%. So they're like addicts of where the plug is every time we go anywhere. So, but I was curious to that, and that's a great point to that, I think. And where do you see the change of that happening? Do you think that there's going to be new innovation around battery?
That's more hard. I'm not a hardware expert. Batteries have gotten longer lasting. I think it's also the chipsets actually get lighter, so they drain less battery. So GPS used to require like the big box that you had to carry around. Now it's on your cell phone that you can actually persistently pull down that data. So I think longer term, the chipsets are going to get lighter in terms of battery usage, and it's the battery life. The technologies can get better.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think from a measurement perspective, it seems like we're all, there's a lot of sort of gray area right now in terms of what is good location data. And I think that when you look around this room, I think everyone's kind of drawing polygons slightly differently. When you're tracking whether or not someone's at a location, some are sort of thinking about location as a space and time, whereas others are sort of thinking of location as someone came in, they stayed there for a while, they dwelled, they're looking at dwell time, they left, and sort of understanding behaviors and things like that based off of it. I also think that on the location side, there's a lot of sort of unanswered questions in terms of, and also in terms of understanding is that Taco Bell still a Taco Bell? Did it change into something else, or are they open today, or is it a holiday, or was that person at the bar at 5 a.m. or were they asleep? And so I think that those types of questions are still largely unanswered in my mind. I don't know if others here have great solutions around that. I'd love to hear more about that, but I feel like that's an interesting thing to focus on as we. Yeah.
And I think from a LUMA perspective, we look at it as kind of where the transformation's happening, what are the major trends that are happening. I think in the next year or two, we'll see a lot of big transactions happen in this space, specifically in location, and that's just my prediction. It's one of the greatest signals. It's going to really bring together all of the core aspects of identifying a consumer, having something that doesn't change, like a cookie. And then with where the future, if you think artificial intelligence is just at the beginning stages and where that growth is, it will no longer be about just capturing different points. It will be that consistent stream, to your point, and then evolving a conversation with consumers. So my evolution of my conversation with Chase will move from, hey, we're right around the corner, stop in and get that credit card, or an email, and the motivation through AI and kind of next-gen content marketing, you'll really be served by a marketer instead of advertised to.
And that's something I can actually talk a little bit publicly about. So Oracle bought a company a few years ago called Crosswise, which specifically is focused on using machine learning and artificial intelligence to really take all those data points, but then also connect them, and so create a persistent sort of our Oracle open ID around the same user, and being able to tie back multiple browsers and devices back to that same individual person.
Yeah. And that's all we have for today, guys. Thank you so much.